The first time Violet Reed saw the auction block, she thought about running, but Vernon Hackett had 6 men watching her every move, and nowhere in Snake River, Idaho was safe for a woman alone in 1878. She stood in the dimmed corner of the Golden Spur Saloon, her hands trembling as she watched the rowdy crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters gather around the makeshift platform Vernon had built just last week. The wooden structure sat in the center of the saloon, like a monument to cruelty, stained with whiskey and blood from the nightly brawls that erupted when men bid for time with the women Vernon kept trapped in his employment. Violet was not like the other girls who worked the saloon. She had arrived in Snake River 3 months ago with nothing but a carpet bag and desperation after her father died of pneumonia, leaving her with debts she could never repay. Vernon had offered her work as a server, promised decent wages, promised safety. The promises had been lies, wrapped in a smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. Tonight would be her first time on that block. Vernon had announced it yesterday with proprietary satisfaction, his thick fingers gripping her chin as he tilted her face toward the lamplight. "You will bring in good money," he had said, his breath reeking of cigars and rot. "The men have been asking about you since you arrived. Fresh face, proper manners. They will pay well for an evening with a lady." Violet had protested, had reminded him she was hired as a server, had even attempted to leave. That was when she learned about the contract she had signed in her grief and confusion, the document that gave Vernon legal authority over her labor until her father's debts were satisfied. The amount kept growing with each week, inflated by charges for her room, her meals, her clothing. She was trapped as surely as if she wore chains. "Get ready," Maisie whispered beside her. Maisie was one of the other girls, barely 20 years old with tired eyes that had seen too much too soon. "Do not fight him during the auction. It only makes things worse." Violet nodded, her throat too tight for words. She wore a dress Vernon had provided, emerald green silk that hugged her figure and exposed more of her chest than she had ever shown in public. Her dark auburn hair had been pinned up, exposing her neck and shoulders. She felt naked despite the layers of fabric. The saloon doors swung open with a crash that made half the room turn. A man entered, and the temperature seemed to drop, despite the summer heat that lingered even after sunset. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that nearly filled the doorway. His dark hair fell past his collar, wild and untamed, framing a face carved from granite and shadow. He wore buckskin pants and a leather vest over a plain cotton shirt, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray and fierce and utterly uncompromising. Violet had never seen him before. Most of the men in Snake River were familiar to her now, their faces and voices blending together in a parade of crude jokes and grabbing hands. This man was different. He moved through the crowd like a wolf through sheep, and the other patrons instinctively stepped aside, their laughter dying as he passed. He walked straight to the bar, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Whiskey," he said, his voice deep and rough as gravel. Vernon appeared from his office, drawn by some instinct that trouble had arrived. His smile was fixed and false as he approached the bar. "Welcome to the Golden Spur, stranger. I am Vernon Hackett, proprietor of this establishment. I do not believe I have had the pleasure of your patronage before." The mountain man ignored him, tossing a coin on the bar as the bartender poured his drink. He lifted the glass and downed the whiskey in one smooth motion, then set the glass down with a thud that seemed louder than it should have been. "We have entertainment starting shortly," Vernon continued, undeterred by the cold reception. "Perhaps you would like to participate in our evening auction? We have some lovely ladies available for companionship, including a new addition tonight." His gaze flickered to Violet, and she felt her stomach twist with nausea. The stranger followed Vernon's gaze. For a moment, his eyes met Violet's across the crowded room, and something passed between them, a recognition that had nothing to do with prior acquaintance and everything to do with understanding. She saw something shift in his expression, a hardening that made his already severe features look dangerous. "Not interested," he said flatly, turning back to his drink. Vernon's smile tightened. "Suit yourself, but the show will be worth watching regardless." The mountain man said nothing. He ordered another whiskey and positioned himself at the far end of the bar, his back to the wall and his eyes scanning the room with the wariness of a man who had survived by staying alert. Vernon clapped his hands, calling for attention. Gentlemen, gentlemen, the moment you have all been waiting for. Tonight, we have a special treat, a new flower to add to our garden. He gestured toward Violet, and one of his men grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the auction block despite her resistance. Her heart hammered as she was pushed up onto the platform. The wood creaked under her feet, and she could smell old beer and tobacco and sweat. The crowd pressed closer, dozens of faces staring up at her with expressions ranging from lust to curiosity to something darker that she did not want to name. "This is Miss Violet," Vernon announced, his voice carrying over the noise. "Freshly arrived to our humble town, refined, educated, and untouched by the rougher elements of frontier life. A true lady, gentlemen. Who will start the bidding for an evening in her company?" Violet wanted to scream, to run, to vanish into the floorboards. Instead, she stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms as the men began to shout out prices. $5! $7! $10 for the whole night! Vernon grinned, playing the crowd like a fiddle. "Come now, gentlemen, a woman of her quality deserves better than that. Look at her, that face, that figure. Who will offer 15? A grizzled miner in the front raised his hand. 15. And I will make it 20 if she is everything you claim." Violet felt bile rise in her throat. She looked desperately around the room, searching for something, anything that might save her. Her eyes found the mountain man again. He was watching the scene with an expression of barely contained fury, his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the edge of the bar so tightly his knuckles had gone white. $20, another man called out, and the crowd roared with approval. 25, 30. The bids climbed higher, and with each increase, Violet felt a piece of herself die. She was being sold like livestock, her humanity reduced to a dollar amount that these men argued over while Vernon counted his future profits. Then the mountain man moved. He set down his glass with deliberate care and walked toward the auction block, his strides long and purposeful. The crowd parted before him instinctively, sensing something primal and dangerous in his approach. "Auction is over," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Vernon's smile vanished. "Excuse me? The auction continues until I say it is finished. If you want to bid, you need to offer more than $30. "I am not bidding." The mountain man stepped up onto the platform, and suddenly he was standing beside Violet, a wall of muscle and barely leashed violence between her and the crowd. "The lady is leaving." Vernon's face flushed red. "You cannot just walk in here and disrupt my business. I have 6 men who work for me, and they will remove you if necessary." "They can try." The mountain man's hand moved to his side, where a massive knife hung in a leather sheath. He did not draw it, but the threat was clear. For a long moment, nobody moved. The saloon had gone silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Violet could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the heat radiating from the mountain man's body as he stood beside her, could smell leather and pine and something wild that clung to his skin. Vernon recovered his composure, his expression shifting to calculated cunning. "The girl owes me money. She signed a contract. If you want her, you need to buy out her debt." "How much?" $300. Violet gasped. The amount was staggering, more than most men earned in half a year. She knew Vernon was inflating the number, adding zeros to an already impossible sum, but there was nothing she could do. The contract was legal, even if it was immoral. The mountain man did not hesitate. "I will give you 200, and you will tear up that contract right now." Vernon laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. 300 or nothing. Take it or leave it, and get off my property either way." What happened next occurred so quickly that Violet barely processed it. The mountain man grabbed Vernon by the front of his expensive silk vest and lifted him off his feet with one arm, holding him suspended like a rag doll. 200, he repeated, his voice low and deadly, "or I will tear apart your saloon board by board, and you along with it." Vernon's face went from red to purple. His men started forward, hands reaching for weapons, but the mountain man's other hand moved in a blur, the knife suddenly free and pressed against Vernon's throat, with just enough pressure to draw a thin line of blood. "Call them off," the mountain man said calmly. "Stop!" Vernon wheezed, his hands clawing uselessly at the arm that held him. "Everyone stop!" The men froze, uncertain and afraid. They were hired muscle, not warriors, and none of them wanted to be the first to challenge the mountain man who held their employer hostage. "Smart choice," the mountain man said. He lowered Vernon back to the platform, but kept the knife visible. "Now tear up the contract." Vernon was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is in my office. Then we will go get it together." The mountain man looked at Violet for the first time since mounting the platform. His eyes were softer when they met hers, though no less intense. "Stay here. I will handle this." She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask who he was and why he was risking his life for a stranger, but her voice would not cooperate. She managed a small nod instead. The mountain man kept his knife drawn as he escorted Vernon through the crowd and into the back office. The saloon remained silent, the patrons watching and waiting to see what would happen. Maisie appeared at the edge of the platform, her face pale. "You need to run," she whispered urgently. "As soon as he comes back out, you need to leave this town and never look back. Vernon will not let this go." "But what about the stranger? Vernon might hurt him." Maisie shook her head. "That man is not the one who needs worrying about. I've never seen anyone handle Vernon like that. Just be ready to move." Minutes stretched like hours. Then the office door opened, and the mountain man emerged, Vernon following behind him with murder in his eyes. The mountain man held a piece of paper, which he held up to the lamplight, and then deliberately tore into pieces, letting them flutter to the floor like snow. "The debt is paid," he announced to the room. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me outside." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The mountain man turned to Violet and offered his hand. "Come on, we are leaving." Violet took his hand, his palm rough and warm against hers, and let him help her down from the auction block. Her legs felt weak, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and relief and terror at what might still come. The mountain man kept himself between her and the crowd as they walked toward the door, his free hand resting on his knife. They were almost to the exit when Vernon's voice rang out, sharp with fury and humiliation. "You think you can just walk into my establishment and steal my property? You think there will not be consequences?" The mountain man paused, turning his head just enough to fix Vernon with a look of pure contempt. "She was never your property. No one is. If I hear that you have tried to contact her, if I hear that you have come looking for her, if I hear that you have continued this sick business of yours with any other woman, I will come back. And next time, I will not be so generous." He pulled Violet through the doors and into the night air. The coolness washed over her like a blessing after the stifling heat of the saloon. She gulped in breath after breath, trying to steady herself, trying to process what had just happened. "Are you all right?" the mountain man asked, and his voice was gentler now, concerned rather than threatening. "I think so," Violet managed. "I do not understand. Why did you do that? You do not even know me." "Did not need to know you to see what was happening." He released her hand and she immediately missed the anchoring weight of his touch. "My name is Wade Calloway. I have a camp about 5 miles north of here, up in the mountains. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot just go into the mountains with a stranger." Wade looked at her steadily. "You have 2 choices. Come with me where you will be safe, or stay in this town where Vernon Hackett will find a way to get you back in his clutches before sunrise. Your choice." It was not really a choice at all. Violet glanced back at the saloon, where shadows moved behind the dirty windows, and made her decision. "I will come with you." Wade nodded and gestured toward the dark street. "My horse is at the livery. Can you ride?" "Yes, my father taught me when I was young." They walked through the sleeping town, their footsteps echoing off the false front buildings that lined the main street. Snake River was not a large town, just a collection of structures that had sprung up around the river trade and the nearby silver mines. Most honest folk were already asleep, and the only light came from the saloons and the pleasure houses that catered to the miners and cowboys who passed through. The livery was dark, but Wade seemed to know his way around. He moved through the shadows with confidence, locating his horse in one of the back stalls. The animal was enormous, a black stallion that matched its owner in size and presence. Wade saddled the horse quickly and efficiently, then led it outside. "Have you ever ridden double?" he asked. "No, but I will manage." Wade swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down to help her up. Violet gathered her skirts and accepted his hand, letting him pull her up behind him. The horse shifted under the additional weight but remained steady. She had no choice but to wrap her arms around Wade's waist, her cheek pressed against his broad back. She could feel the heat of him through his shirt, the solid muscle and steady breathing that spoke of strength and confidence. "Hold tight," Wade said, and then they were moving. The horse carried them out of town at a swift trot, then increased to a canter once they hit the open trail heading north. Violet clung to Wade, her heart in her throat as the landscape flew past in shades of gray and black. The moon was nearly full, providing just enough light to see the path ahead. Trees rose around them as they climbed into the foothills, the air growing cooler and filled with the scent of pine and earth. They rode for what felt like an hour, though Violet lost all sense of time. Her body ached from the tension of the day, and exhaustion crept over her like a heavy blanket. Several times she found herself nodding off, her grip on Wade loosening until the horse's movement jolted her awake again. Finally, Wade slowed the horse to a walk and then to a stop. "We are here," he said quietly. Violet looked around and saw nothing but trees and darkness. Then Wade dismounted and helped her down, and she realized there was a small clearing ahead, barely visible in the shadows. A lean-to structure stood against a rock face, and the remnants of a fire pit marked the center of the camp. "It is not much," Wade said, leading his horse toward the lean-to, "but it is safe and it is dry. You can sleep there tonight. I will keep watch." "You do not need to do that. You have already done so much." Wade unsaddled his horse and rubbed the animal down with practiced motions. "Vernon Hackett strikes me as the type to hold a grudge. I would rather be cautious than sorry." Violet watched him work, studying this man who had upended her life in the space of an hour. He moved with the efficiency of someone used to taking care of himself, every action purposeful and spare. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even in the darkness, and his hands were large and scarred from hard work and harder living. "Why were you at the saloon tonight?" she asked. Wade glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I come down from the mountains every few months for supplies. Tonight was just bad timing, or good timing, depending on how you look at it." "Good timing," Violet said softly. "Definitely good timing." Wade finished with the horse and turned his attention to the fire pit, kneeling down to arrange kindling and larger pieces of wood. Within minutes, he had a small fire going, the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. The light revealed details Violet had not noticed before. A scar that ran along his jaw, the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. "How old are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. 32. Wade fed another stick into the fire. "You?" 23. Wade nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. He stood and retrieved a rolled blanket from his supplies, which he handed to Violet. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we figure out your options. You have family anywhere? Friends who might take you in?" Violet shook her head, fighting back the tears that suddenly threatened. "My father was all I had. He came out west after my mother died, looking for a new start. We were supposed to build a life here together, but then he got sick, and the doctor bills piled up. And after he died, I had nothing. That is when Vernon found me. Then tomorrow we figure out something else." Wade's voice was firm, allowing no room for argument or despair. "You are not going back to that saloon, and you are not going to end up in another situation like that one. I give you my word. You do not owe me anything. You have already saved me once." Wade met her eyes across the fire, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Maybe I do not owe you. But that does not mean I am going to walk away and leave you to fend for yourself. That is not who I am." Violet did not know what to say to that. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and settled down near the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones. Despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the massive changes the last few hours had brought, she felt safer than she had in months. Wade positioned himself on the opposite side of the fire, his back against a tree and his knife resting across his knees. He looked alert and dangerous, a guardian watching over the darkness. "Wade," Violet said quietly. "Yeah? Thank you. I know I already said it, but thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there tonight." Wade was quiet for a long moment. You do not need to thank me. Just get some rest. Violet closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion finally take her under. Her last conscious thought was that she was sleeping in the wilderness with a strange mountain man, and somehow that felt infinitely safer than anywhere else she could have been. When Violet woke, the sun was already well above the horizon, golden light filtering through the pine branches overhead. The fire had been built up again, and something that smelled absolutely divine was cooking over the flames. She sat up, pushing tangled hair out of her face, and found Wade crouched by the fire, tending to what looked like fish roasting on a makeshift spit. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Caught breakfast in the stream. Hope you like trout." "I like anything that is not saloon stew." Violet stood, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Sleeping on the ground had not been comfortable, but it had been sleep, and that was something she desperately needed. Wade finally looked at her, his eyes quickly scanning her face as if checking for injuries or distress. Apparently satisfied with what he saw, he turned back to the fish. "There's a stream about 50 yards that direction if you want to wash up. The water is cold but clean." Violet followed his directions and found the stream, a clear ribbon of water tumbling over smooth rocks. She knelt beside it and splashed her face, gasping at the icy shock. The cold water helped clear the fog from her mind, and she took a moment to gather her thoughts. Her entire life had changed in one night. She had no home, no employment, no possessions beyond the dress she wore. All she had was the uncertain protection of a mountain man who had saved her for reasons she still did not fully understand. When she returned to the camp, Wade had the fish plated on flat pieces of bark. He handed her one without ceremony, along with a piece of what looked like hardtack bread. "It is not fancy, but it will keep you going," he said. They ate in silence, and Violet had to admit the simple meal was one of the best she had ever tasted. Maybe it was the fresh air, or the fact that she was free, or simply that she was starving, but every bite was a revelation. "So," Wade said when they had finished, "we need to talk about what comes next. You said you have no family, no friends in the area. What about work? Any skills that might help you find employment?" "I can read and write. My father made sure I had an education. I can do basic mathematics, handle correspondence, organize records. I worked as his assistant before we came west." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. Snake River might not have much use for those skills, but Boise City would. It is about 80 miles southwest of here. There are businesses there, schools, opportunities for educated women. 80 miles might as well be 800 if I have no money to get there or support myself once I arrive. We will work that out." Wade stood and began breaking down the camp with the same efficiency he did everything else. "I have some money saved, not much, but enough to get you started. And I know some people in Boise who owe me favors." Violet felt her cheeks flush with shame and pride warring inside her. "I cannot take your money. I cannot be in your debt the way I was in Vernon's." Wade stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. "It would not be like that. I'm offering help, not buying you. There is a difference." "Is there? How do I know you do not have your own plans for what I should owe you?" The moment the words left her mouth, Violet regretted them. Wade's expression went cold, and he took a step back as if she had struck him. "If that is what you think of me, then maybe you should have stayed in town." "I am sorry," Violet said quickly, her heart sinking. "That was unfair. You've been nothing but kind and honorable. I'm just scared, and I'm used to men who want things from me that I do not want to give." Wade's expression softened slightly. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. "I understand. You have been through hell, and you have no reason to trust anyone, especially not me. But I am going to be straight with you, Violet. I do not want anything from you except to know that you are going to be all right. Can you accept that?" She wanted to believe him. More than that, something in her chest ached with the need to believe that there were still good men in the world, men who helped without expecting payment in flesh or servitude. "I will try," she said honestly. Wade nodded. "That is all I can ask. Now, here is what I propose. We head to Boise City together. I will vouch for you with the people I know, help you find work and lodging. Once you are settled and earning your own way, I will head back to my mountains and we will call it even. Does that sound acceptable? Yes, Violet said, relief flooding through her. Yes, that sounds more than acceptable. But can I ask you something first? Go ahead. Why do you live up here alone? You do not seem like a man who would struggle to make a life in town if you wanted to. Wade's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he looked away, his gaze distant. I was a different person before I came to these mountains. I was a soldier, a tracker for the army during the wars with the native tribes. I did things I'm not proud of, followed orders that should never have been given. When it was over, I could not go back to regular life, could not pretend I was still the same man who enlisted full of patriotic ideals. So I came here, where the only person I can hurt is myself. The raw honesty in his words left Violet momentarily speechless. She had asked a simple question and received a glimpse into a pain she could not fully comprehend. I am sorry, she said softly. That sounds like a heavy burden to carry. We all carry something. Wade finished packing up the camp and turned to his horse. Come on, we should get moving if we want to make good time. They rode together again, though this time in daylight. The mountain landscape was breathtaking, all soaring pines and rocky outcroppings and clear blue sky. Violet found herself relaxing despite the uncertainty of her situation. There was something peaceful about being away from town, away from the noise and the grasping hands and the constant fear. This is beautiful, she said, her voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. It is, Wade agreed. It is the one thing that makes life bearable sometimes, when everything else feels like too much. I can walk outside and remember that the world is bigger than my regrets. They descended from the mountains slowly, taking a different route than they had the night before. Wade explained that he wanted to avoid the main trail in case Vernon had sent men looking for them. Violet's stomach clenched at the thought, but Wade seemed unconcerned, his attention focused on the path ahead. It was mid-afternoon when they stopped to rest the horse and eat the jerky and dried fruit Wade had packed. They sat on a fallen log, the forest quiet around them except for the occasional bird call. Can I ask you something now? Wade said, breaking the comfortable silence. Of course. What were you planning to do? Before Vernon trapped you, what did you hope would happen once you came out west? Violet considered the question, remembering the optimistic young woman who had stepped off the stage in Snake River 3 months ago. I wanted to help my father build something. He talked about starting a freight business, using his experience from the war to organize supply routes. It was a good plan, and I was going to handle the business side of things. We were going to be partners. Her voice broke slightly. We were going to prove that you could still make an honest living in this territory. You still can, Wade said quietly. Maybe not the way you planned, but there are opportunities if you know where to look. In Boise City? Maybe. Or somewhere else if that suits you better. The point is you get to decide. You are free now, Violet. Really free. You can go anywhere, do anything. Be anyone you want to be. That is worth more than all the silver in these mountains. Violet looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the scarred mountain man who had saved her, but someone who understood what it meant to lose yourself and have to find a way back. Is that what you did? Came to the mountains to be free? Something like that. Wade stood and offered her his hand. Come on, we have a few more hours of daylight, and I want to put more distance between us and Snake River. They rode until darkness forced them to stop. Wade made camp again, this time in a small valley with good cover and a clear view of the surrounding area. He built the fire, set up the lean-to, and tended to his horse, moving through the routine with practiced ease. Violet tried to help where she could, gathering firewood and arranging stones around the fire pit. It felt good to have something to do, some way to contribute, rather than simply being a burden. Wade noticed her efforts and gave her a small nod of approval that warmed her more than the fire. You are a quick learner, he said as they settled down to eat another simple meal. I've always been adaptable. My father said it was my best quality. Wade studied her across the flames. He would be proud of you. The way you are handling all this, the strength you are showing, that is not something everyone has. I do not feel very strong. I feel like I am barely holding myself together. Strength is not about never being afraid or never struggling. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. You have that in spades. Violet felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back quickly. Thank you. I needed to hear that. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Violet found her gaze returning to Wade again and again, drawn by something she could not quite name. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel protected and valued in a way she had never experienced before. Wade, she said hesitantly. Yeah? When we get to Boise City and you help me get settled, what will you do? Just go back to the mountains alone? Wade poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. That is the plan. It is what I have always done. Does not that get lonely? Sometimes. He looked up at her, and something in his eyes made her pulse quicken. But lonely is safe. Lonely means I cannot hurt anyone else, cannot fail anyone who depends on me. Or maybe lonely just means you are punishing yourself for things that were not your fault. Wade's jaw tightened. You do not know what I did. You are right, I do not. But I know what you did for me. I know you risked your life to save a complete stranger. I know you were taking time out of your life to help me get back on my feet when you could have just walked away. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze locked with hers across the fire. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we will reach the main road to Boise, and we will be able to travel faster. Violet recognized the deflection for what it was, but she let it go. They had time, and she was learning that Wade Calloway was not a man who opened up easily. Instead, she wrapped herself in the blanket he provided and settled down for the night, feeling the warmth of the fire and the strange comfort of knowing Wade was keeping watch. The next 2 days passed in a rhythm of riding and camping, moving steadily toward Boise City. Wade proved to be an excellent traveling companion, quiet when silence was needed, informative when Violet asked questions about the landscape or wildlife, and always vigilant for any signs of danger. They encountered other travelers on the road occasionally, and Wade was always carefully polite, positioning himself between Violet and any potential threats. Violet found herself growing increasingly comfortable with him, even looking forward to their evening conversations around the fire. Wade slowly began to open up more, sharing stories about his life before the war, about growing up in Missouri and learning to track and hunt from his father. She shared her own stories in return, telling him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's death from fever, about the desperation that had driven her father to seek a new life in the West. On the third evening, as they made camp within sight of Boise City's lights in the distance, Violet felt a strange reluctance to continue forward. Tomorrow they would reach the city, and Wade would help her find work and lodging, and then he would leave. The thought of him riding back into the mountains alone made her chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. Wade, she said as they sat by the fire, what if I do not want to stay in Boise City? He looked at her sharply. Why not? It is your best chance for a fresh start. I know, but what if I want something different? Like what? Violet took a deep breath, gathering her courage. What if I wanted to stay in the mountains, learn to live the way you do, be free the way you described? Wade's expression shuddered. That is not a life for you, Violet. You are educated, refined. You deserve better than struggling to survive in the wilderness. Maybe I am tired of what I am supposed to deserve. Maybe I want to decide for myself what kind of life I want to live. You have known me for 3 days. You do not know anything about how hard that life is, how isolated, how dangerous. Then teach me. Violet leaned forward, her eyes intense. You said I was a quick learner. Give me a chance to prove it. Wade stood abruptly, pacing away from the fire. You do not understand what you are asking. Then explain it to me. He turned back to face her, and in the firelight, she could see the war happening behind his eyes. You are asking me to let you into my life, to be responsible for another person, to risk caring about someone again. I came to those mountains to be alone because I cannot handle that kind of responsibility anymore. Do you understand that? I understand that you are scared, Violet said gently, standing to face him. I understand that you have been hurt and that you think isolation is the answer. But Wade, you've been taking care of me for 3 days now, and you have not failed once. You have been strong and kind and protective, and I think maybe you are more ready to let someone in than you believe. And what if I fail? What if something happens to you because I was not good enough, fast enough, smart enough to prevent it? Then we will deal with it together. Violet crossed the space between them, looking up into his storm-gray eyes. I am not asking you to be perfect. I am just asking you to let me make my own choices about my life. And right now, I am choosing to not walk into that city tomorrow and pretend that these last few days did not change something fundamental inside me. Wade looked down at her, and she could see the longing in his face fighting against the fear. Violet, I am twice your age. I'm a broken man living in the wilderness because I cannot fit into civilized society. You should be choosing a future with possibilities, not limiting yourself to my damaged life. You are 32, not ancient, and you are not broken, you are healing. There is a difference. She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand against his chest. His heart was thundering under her palm, and she felt a thrill at the evidence that he was not as unmoved as he pretended to be. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, I'm just asking for a chance. Teach me to survive in the mountains. Let me stay for a while and see if this is really what I want. If it does not work out, I can still go to Boise City, but please do not make that decision for me. Wade covered her hand with his own, his palm rough and warm. You are going to be the death of me, he said. But there was no real anger in his voice, only a weary resignation mixed with something that might have been hope. Psha, is that a yes? He sighed, long and deep. It is we will try it and see, but I'm not going to sugarcoat how hard it will be. Mountain life is not romantic or easy. It is cold and difficult and sometimes boring beyond belief. If you want to stay, you need to understand that. I understand, and I'm willing to try if you are willing to teach me. Wade looked at her for another long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, we will head back to the mountains tomorrow, but we are doing this properly. I will teach you everything you need to know to survive on your own, so if you decide to leave, or if something happens to me, you will be able to take care of yourself. Agreed? Agreed. Wade released her hand and stepped back, but the air between them still crackled with unspoken possibilities. Get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow, and it is all uphill. Violet smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Good night, Wade. Good night, Violet. The return journey to the mountains took 2 full days, and by the time they reached Wade's permanent camp, Violet was exhausted but exhilarated. The camp was larger than the temporary ones they had used on the trail, nestled in a protected valley with a stream nearby, and good hunting all around. Wade had a solid cabin built into the side of a rocky outcropping, small but well constructed with a real door and windows covered in oiled canvas. You built this yourself? Violet asked, impressed despite herself. Over the course of 2 years. Wade dismounted and helped her down. It is not much, but it is warm and dry, which is all that matters up here. He showed her inside, and Violet was surprised by how comfortable it was. There was a stone fireplace, a bed built into one corner, shelves holding supplies and tools, and even a small table with 2 chairs. Everything was clean and organized, the space of someone who took pride in his home despite living alone. You will sleep inside, Wade said. I will set up the lean-to for myself. I cannot take your bed. This is your home. And you are my guest. We will figure out something more permanent if you stay, but for now, this is how it is going to be. Violet wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw told her it would be pointless. Instead, she nodded and set down the small bundle of possessions Wade had bought for her during a brief stop at a trading post. It was not much, just a change of clothes and basic necessities, but it was more than she had owned in months. Wade built up the fire and put together a meal while Violet explored the cabin and the immediate area outside. The view was spectacular, mountains rising in every direction, and the sky so vast and blue it seemed impossible. She could understand why Wade had chosen this place. There was a peace here that she had never experienced in town, a sense of being part of something larger and older than human concerns. That night, they ate dinner together at the small table. and Wade began outlining what Violet's education would entail. First thing you need to learn is how to start a fire in any conditions. You could die of cold up here faster than you would die of hunger, so fire is essential. After that, we will cover water purification, basic hunting and trapping, edible plants, navigation, and shelter building. By the time we are done, you will be able to survive for weeks on your own if you had to. That sounds like a lot to learn. It is. But you said you were adaptable, so we will find out just how adaptable you really are. The next weeks were some of the hardest of Violet's life, but also some of the most rewarding. Wade proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, pushing her to master skills that felt impossible at first. She learned to start fires with flint and steel, to identify dozens of edible plants, to set snares for rabbits and squirrels. Wade taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her to adjust her stance and breathing, his hands gentle but firm as he guided her through the proper technique. The physical closeness required for many of the lessons created a tension between them that neither acknowledged directly. Violet found herself hyper-aware of every time Wade touched her, even in the most innocent contexts. The brush of his hand against hers when he passed her something. The warmth of his body when he stood close to show her how to gut a fish. The weight of his gaze when he watched her practice a new skill. For his part, Wade seemed to be fighting his own battle. Violet caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race, only to have him quickly look away and suggest another lesson or chore that needed doing. He maintained strict boundaries, sleeping in his lean-to even when the weather turned cold, keeping a careful distance whenever possible. But despite his efforts, the walls between them were slowly crumbling. They fell into an easy rhythm of shared work and shared meals, conversations that started about practical matters and drifted into deeper territory. Wade told her more about his past, about the guilt he carried for following orders he knew were wrong, about the faces that haunted his dreams. Violet shared her own fears and insecurities, the loneliness she had felt even before her father died, the sense of never quite fitting into the life that was expected of her. "Maybe that is why we understand each other," Wade said one evening as they sat by the fire after a long day of lessons. "We are both running from the people we were supposed to be." "I do not think I am running anymore," Violet said quietly. "I think I am finally running towards something instead of away." Wade looked at her, and the firelight reflected in his eyes made them glow like embers. "What are you running toward?" "I'm not sure yet, but I know it feels right being here. Learning from you. Building something new." Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the space between them and took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. "You're extraordinary, you know that? The way you have adapted to this life, the strength you show every day. I've never met anyone like you." Violet's breath caught. "Wade, I know I said I would not do this." His voice was rough with emotion. "I know I said I was not the right man for you, but I cannot keep pretending that having you here has not changed everything. You have brought light back into my life, Violet, and I do not know how I am going to let you go when you decide to leave." "What if I do not want to leave?" Wade's grip on her hand tightened. "You say that now, but winters here are brutal. You have not experienced the isolation yet, the months when you cannot leave the valley because the snow is too deep. You might feel differently when you have been trapped here with only me for company." Violet pulled her hand free and stood, moving around the fire to kneel beside Wade. "Look at me," she said firmly. When he met her eyes, she continued, "I'm not a child, and I'm not naive. I know what I'm choosing. I know this life will be hard, but I've also learned something these past weeks. I am stronger than I ever believed I could be, and that is because of you. You saw something in me that I did not see in myself. So please, stop trying to protect me from my own choices." Wade reached up slowly, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with his rough exterior. "I am terrified of failing you. Then we will be terrified together." Violet leaned into his touch. "But we will also be together, and that is what matters." Wade studied her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, with a groan that sounded like surrender and relief combined, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, when instead she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, Wade deepened the kiss, his arms coming around her to pull her closer. He tasted like coffee and smoke and wild places, and Violet felt like she was finally home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I am not good at this," he said quietly, "at being what someone needs, at opening up and letting someone in. Then we will learn together." Violet smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You taught me to survive in the wilderness. I will teach you how to let yourself be happy." Wade laughed, the sound rusty as if he did not do it often. "That seems like a fair trade." They sat together by the fire for hours that night, talking and kissing and simply being close. Wade told her things he said he had never told anyone, about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, about the guilt that was a constant companion. Violet listened without judgment, offering comfort through her presence and her touch. "You are not the man who followed those orders anymore," she said when he finished speaking. "You are the man who walked into a saloon and saved a woman from being sold like property. You are the man who gave up your solitude to teach someone to survive. You are the man I am falling in love with, Wade Calloway, and that man is good and brave and worthy of happiness." Wade pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I do not deserve you. Good thing I am not asking for permission or deserving. I'm just asking for you." As autumn deepened into winter, Violet settled fully into mountain life. The cabin that had seemed adequate for one person became cozy for two, as Wade finally stopped insisting on sleeping in the lean-to. They shared the bed, shared their warmth through the increasingly cold nights, shared kisses and caresses that slowly, carefully progressed into something deeper and more intimate. Wade was gentle with her, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, always putting her needs before his own. The first time they made love, he was so careful and tender that Violet cried, overwhelmed by the feeling of being truly cherished for the first time in her life. "Did I hurt you?" Wade asked, alarmed by her tears. "No," Violet said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are perfect. This is perfect. I just never knew it could be like this." Wade kissed her tears away, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Neither did I," he admitted. "I thought I was dead inside, incapable of feeling anything but guilt and regret. But you brought me back to life, Violet. You made me want to be better, to be worthy of what you are offering me." "You already are worthy," Violet said, pulling him down for another kiss. "You always have been. You just needed someone to show you." The winter Wade had warned her about arrived with a fury, burying the valley in snow and cutting them off from the outside world for weeks at a time. But rather than feeling trapped or isolated, Violet found herself content in a way she had never experienced before. The days had a peaceful rhythm, Wade checking his trap lines while Violet tended the fire and prepared meals, both of them working together to keep the cabin warm and their supplies managed. The evenings were spent reading from the small collection of books Wade had accumulated, telling stories and making love by firelight. "I was wrong," Wade said one night as they lay tangled together under a mountain of blankets, the wind howling outside. "I thought winter would make you want to leave. Instead, I think I am falling more in love with you every day." Violet propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at his face in the flickering firelight. "You love me?" "I thought that was obvious by now." Wade reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I love you, Violet Reed. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you laugh when you finally master a new skill. I love the way you look at the mountains like they are the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Violet felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were happy tears. "I love you too, Wade. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stepped up onto that auction block and told Vernon the auction was over. You were the answer to a prayer I did not even know I was saying." Wade pulled her down for a deep, searching kiss. "Marry me," he said when they broke apart. "I know we have not been together long. I know this is not a traditional courtship, but I know what I want, and I want you as my wife, Violet. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a future together, here in these mountains or anywhere else you want to go. Just say yes." "Yes," Violet said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to everything. They were married in the spring, as soon as the snow melted enough for them to make the trip down to Snake River. Wade had suggested traveling to Boise City instead, but Violet had insisted on returning to the town where their story began. I want everyone to see that I am not the same woman Vernon tried to sell, she explained. I want them to see that I survived, that I found happiness, that his cruelty did not break me. Wade understood. They rode into Snake River together on a bright April morning, Violet wearing a simple but beautiful dress Wade had bought from the trading post, her hand clasped firmly in his. The town looked exactly the same, but Violet felt like an entirely different person from the terrified girl who had stood on that auction block 6 months earlier. News of their arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the small church at the end of town, a crowd had gathered. Wade kept himself positioned protectively, ready to intervene if anyone tried to cause trouble. But most of the onlookers seemed merely curious, whispering among themselves about the saloon girl who had disappeared with the dangerous mountain man. The preacher agreed to marry them, though he gave Wade a long, measuring look first. You will treat her well? He asked bluntly. I will not perform this ceremony if there is any question about her welfare. I will treat her better than well, Wade said firmly. I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows she is loved and valued and safe. The preacher nodded, apparently satisfied, and performed the ceremony. It was simple and quick, but when Wade slipped a ring on Violet's finger, a plain gold band he had traded for over the winter, and kissed her as his wife, Violet felt like the luckiest woman in the world. As they were leaving the church, Vernon Hackett appeared, stepping out from the shadows with a sneer on his face. He had lost weight, Violet noticed, and there was a hardness to him that had not been there before. So the little whore found herself a protector, Vernon said, his voice dripping with contempt. How touching! Tell me, mountain man, does she service you as well as she would have serviced my customers? Wade went very still, and Violet felt the tension coil through his body like a spring ready to release. But before he could move, Violet stepped forward, placing herself between Vernon and Wade. You do not get to speak to me that way anymore, she said clearly, her voice carrying to the gathered crowd. You do not get to define who I am or what I am worth. I survived you, Vernon Hackett. I am stronger and happier and more free than you will ever be. And I have a husband who loves me, which is more than you will ever understand. Vernon's face flushed with rage. You still owe me money. That contract was torn up and paid in full, Wade cut in, his voice deadly quiet. I gave you $200, which was more than generous considering what you were attempting to do to her. If you try to pursue this further, I will make good on my promise to burn your establishment to the ground. Do we understand each other? The crowd murmured, some voices expressing approval, others shock. Vernon looked around and seemed to realize he had lost this particular battle. His saloon had already lost much business after word spread about his attempted auction of Violet. Several of his other girls had left, finding work elsewhere, or moving on to different towns. He was a diminished man, and everyone knew it. Get out of my town, he spat. Gladly, Wade replied. He took Violet's hand and led her toward their horse, the crowd parting before them. As they mounted and prepared to ride away, Maisie pushed through the onlookers. Violet, wait, she called. I just wanted to say congratulations and thank you. Thank me for what? For showing the rest of us that we do not have to accept the life men like Vernon try to force on us. 3 of us left after you disappeared. We have respectable work now. You gave us courage. Violet felt tears sting her eyes. She reached down from the horse to squeeze Maisie's hand. I'm so glad. You deserve better, Maisie. You all do. As they rode out of Snake River for the last time, Wade looked over at her with pride and love shining in his eyes. That was well done. You faced him down like a warrior. I had a good teacher, Violet said with a smile. Now take me home, husband. I am ready to start our life together. The years that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. She and Wade built a true partnership, working together to expand the cabin, cultivate a small garden, and create a life that was simple but deeply fulfilling. Wade taught her everything he knew about surviving and thriving in the wilderness, and Violet brought her own skills to their partnership, organizing their supplies, keeping careful records of trap lines and seasonal patterns, even teaching Wade to read better than he had before. They were not entirely isolated. A few times a year, they made trips to trading posts or small towns for supplies they could not make themselves. Word spread about the mountain man and his educated wife, and occasionally other settlers or travelers would seek them out for Wade's tracking skills or Violet's ability to read and write. They helped where they could, and slowly built a reputation as people who could be trusted. 2 years after their marriage, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, worried about bringing a child into their remote existence, but Wade was overjoyed. "We will make it work," he promised, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I will build a bigger cabin, stock up on extra supplies, and when the time comes, I will ride down to fetch a midwife. You and our baby will be safe, Violet, I swear it." Wade kept his promise. He expanded the cabin, adding a separate room for the baby. He rode to the nearest settlement and convinced an experienced midwife to come stay with him for the last month of Violet's pregnancy and the first month after the birth. And when their son was born on a cold November morning, Wade held the tiny, squalling infant with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Wade said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both perfect." They named him James after Violet's father, and he grew up strong and healthy in the mountain air. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son named Thomas. The cabin that had once seemed too large for one person now rang with laughter and children's voices. Wade proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving and endlessly protective. He taught the children everything he had taught Violet: how to respect the wilderness, how to survive and thrive in it, how to read the seasons and the animals. Violet handled their education in reading and mathematics and history, determined that her children would have opportunities she and Wade had fought so hard to create. The children grew, and life continued its peaceful rhythm. They faced challenges, certainly harsh winters, a year when game was scarce, illnesses that had to be nursed through with careful attention and prayer. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. One evening, when the children were asleep and Wade and Violet sat together by the fire, as they had done countless times before, Wade pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Staying here instead of going to Boise City? Building this life instead of the one you might have had?" Violet looked around the cabin they had built together, thought about their sleeping children, remembered the journey that had brought them here. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You saved my life that night in the saloon, Wade. But more than that, you taught me who I could be. You gave me freedom and love and a family. How could I regret any of that?" "I am the one who should be grateful," Wade said. "You took a broken man and made him whole again. You gave me a reason to believe in goodness and love. You gave me everything, Violet." "Then we are even," Violet said with a smile, pulling him down for a kiss, "and we have the rest of our lives to continue being grateful together." Years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. James grew tall and strong like his father, learning to track and hunt with the same skill Wade possessed. Sarah was quick and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she saw. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, preferring books to rifles, but capable with both. When James turned 18, he announced his intention to travel down to Boise City to see what opportunities might exist there. Violet's heart ached at the thought of her eldest leaving, but she and Wade had always known this day might come. "We raised them to be independent," Wade reminded her the night before James was set to leave. "We gave them the skills to survive anywhere and the education to thrive in civilization. Now we have to trust that we did our job well and let them make their own choices." James returned after 3 months with tales of the growing city, but ultimately decided he preferred the mountains. He eventually built his own cabin a few valleys over, close enough for regular visits but far enough to establish his independence. Sarah married a teacher who came through the territory and moved with him to Oregon, writing long letters about her new life that Violet treasured. Thomas split his time between the mountains and the towns, using his education to work as a surveyor and cartographer, but always returning home between jobs. Wade and Violet grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of a life lived fully and physically. But they never lost the connection that had formed that first night when Wade had stepped up onto an auction block and declared the auction over. They still kissed like newlyweds, still found excuses to touch each other throughout the day, still stayed up late talking by the fire about everything and nothing. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Wade took Violet on a trip back to Snake River. The town had grown and changed, barely recognizable from the rough collection of buildings they remembered. The Golden Spur Saloon had burned down years ago under mysterious circumstances that Wade knew more about than he let on, and had been replaced by a respectable hotel and restaurant. They walked through the town together, hand in hand, and Violet felt no pain from the memories. That frightened girl who had stood on the auction block was still part of her, but she was also so much more now. She was a wife, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had built a life on her own terms. "Thank you," Violet said as they stood where the saloon had once been. "For what?" Wade asked. "For seeing me that night. For not walking away. For giving me a chance to become who I was always meant to be." Wade pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he always had. "Thank you for letting me love you. For saving me just as much as I saved you. For being my partner in everything." They returned to their mountain home as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Their cabin glowed with welcoming light, and Violet could see the garden they had tended for decades, the workshop Wade had built, the swing he had hung for the grandchildren who visited regularly. This was her kingdom, she thought, not palaces or mansions or the respectable town life she might have had in Boise City. But this cabin in the wilderness, built with love and maintained with effort, filled with memories of laughter and tears and everything in between. This was what she had fought for, what Wade had helped her claim, what they had created together. As they entered the cabin and Wade built up the fire for the evening, Violet felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. They had faced so much together: fear, prejudice, hardship, the challenges of raising children in isolation, the inevitable losses that come with age. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. Wade caught her watching him and smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart flutter even after 3 decades of marriage. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am. How grateful I am that you walked into that saloon that night. How much I love you." Wade crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am the lucky one. You are my miracle, Violet Calloway. You always have been." They stood there in the firelight, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family and a legacy of love. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their happiness. And inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Wade and Violet knew they had found exactly what they were always meant to find: not just survival, but joy. Not just safety, but passion. Not just companionship, but true, deep, abiding love that would last until their final breath and beyond. The auction block had been meant to break her, but instead, it had led her to the man who would help her become unbreakable. Vernon Hackett had tried to sell her like property, never dreaming that his cruelty would be the catalyst that brought her to Wade. And though Wade had threatened to burn the auction block to the ground, in the end, the best revenge was simply living well, building a life so full of love and purpose that the darkness of that night became nothing more than a distant memory, a wrong turn that had ultimately led her home. As the fire crackled and the night deepened around them, Wade and Violet settled into their familiar evening routine, comfortable and content in the life they had built. They had started as strangers, a desperate woman and a damaged man, but they had become so much more. They were partners, lovers, best friends, parents, grandparents. They were survivors who had chosen not just to survive, but to thrive. They were proof that even in the harsh wilderness of the 1870s American West, love could flourish and grow strong enough to weather any storm. And when they finally went to bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 30 years, Violet's last thought before sleep claimed her was simple and profound. She was home, she was loved, and she was exactly where she was always meant to be. The end.